My grandfather left me his entire estate. Then my brother and mother said the will was outdated and tried to change it. But I was one step ahead, and every move they made only exposed them in the end. Ever had one of those moments where you knew your family would turn on you like a pack of wolves, but you were ready? I inherited my grandfather's entire estate, and it wasn't a heartwarming gift. It was a declaration of war, and I was about to make them regret every single attack. Most people picture inheritance as this glamorous moment. You know, sitting in a mahogany-paneled office while a lawyer solemnly hands you a golden key. My reality felt more like an awkward family dinner, but with better catering. I was 36, and there I was in Springfield, Ohio, squeezed between my mother's dramatic sighing and my brother Brandon's failed attempts to look stoic. My grandfather, Walt's lawyer, a Mr. Clancy who smelled faintly of menthol and old books, cleared his throat and read the will in a voice that could lull a toddler to sleep. To my grandson, Lucas, who was the only one to show up when I was alive, I leave the entirety of my estate, real and liquid assets, including the family home at 211 Waverly Street, all investment accounts, and remaining savings. My mother let out a choke noise, like she'd just swallowed a bug. Brandon blinked, then scrolled his phone, no doubt already trying to figure out if you could PayPal someone a lawsuit. I didn't say anything. Not when Mr. Clancy offered me a polite nod. Not when my mother started hissing about fairness. And not when Brandon muttered that he had plans for this house. Because deep down, I knew Grandpa hadn't left me the house to make me rich. He left it to me because I was the one who sat with him when his knees went bad, who mowed the lawn when Brandon was too busy launching a startup, who actually asked him how he was doing instead of what he could give us. And because I knew exactly what kind of entitled nonsense was about to rain down on me, I spent the next month quietly preparing. First, I hired Miss Vega, an estate attorney so sharp she could have sliced bread just by looking at it. She walked me through setting up an irrevocable trust to hold the property and all assets. Irrevocable meant permanent, like a tattoo you couldn't laser off. Then, I transferred the house's utilities, taxes, and insurance into a shell LLC I named Birch and Brick Holdings. I would have preferred something spicier, like Not Yours, Brandon LLC, but Miss Vega insisted professionalism mattered. Finally, I stashed the original deed, Grandpa's handwritten cautions, and every supporting document into a safe deposit box where they'd be safe from any sudden, accidental document disappearances. I didn't post about it. I didn't tell any of my cousins, even the ones I actually liked. I didn't even tell my coworker Tanya, who knew every detail of my life, right down to what I packed for lunch. Instead, I smiled politely when my mother said things like, "We'll figure out a way to split this like a family." And when Brandon bragged on Facebook about a big new chapter coming soon, I just let them think I was the same old Lucas. Let them believe I hadn't done a damn thing to protect what Grandpa left me. Because sometimes the best move isn't fighting back right away. Sometimes it's sitting quietly and waiting for the moment you can show them you were 3 steps ahead the whole time. You could almost chart the phases of my family's denial like stages of grief. First came minimizing. A week after the will was read, my mom started texting me little pearls of passive aggression. "I just hope you remember that houses are a lot of work, sweetheart. Grandpa probably didn't realize how much property taxes have gone up. If you need help managing things, you know Brandon has experience." Experience. Brandon once tried to flip a rental property and ended up with a restraining order from the HOA because he thought curb appeal meant painting the porch neon green. Then came planting seeds. Brandon started posting vague nonsense on Facebook. Big changes coming soon. Can't wait to share. Sometimes what's meant for you finds its way home. He accompanied these captions with photos of random McMansions he pulled off Zillow. You'd think he was about to become the next Chip Gaines. Meanwhile, Mom doubled down. Over brunch with our Aunt Carol, who immediately called me. She apparently said, "It's just unfair. Walt never meant for Lucas to have everything. He always said family was about sharing." Yes, Grandpa also said that if Brandon ever got off his butt, he might actually accomplish something. Funny how she left that part out. I didn't reply to any of it. Not the texts, not the calls, not the carefully scripted voicemails about doing the right thing. Instead, I spent my evenings in the big front room with the stained glass window, sorting through old boxes of Grandpa's papers. Some nights, I'd find old receipts from the 1970s. Other nights, there'd be letters he'd written but never sent, like the one to my dad about how disappointed he was in how they treated me. I'll be honest, I didn't know what to do with the hurt. It wasn't a shock exactly, just confirmation. That's the thing about being the kid everyone expects to roll over. The moment you don't, they start acting like you changed. But nothing about me had changed. I was still Lucas, still the grandson who showed up. They were just realizing I wasn't going to pretend anymore. One evening, while I was reorganizing the upstairs study, I heard my phone buzz. A text from Brandon. No greeting, just a single sentence. Hope you making the most of the house while you can. I set the phone down. I wasn't going to bite. Not yet. Let them think I was oblivious. Let them think I hadn't planned for exactly this. It was almost funny how predictable it all was. Almost. It was a Thursday afternoon in late October when the inevitable showdown finally arrived. I'd been in the backyard all morning, wearing Grandpa's ancient canvas work gloves and fighting the world's most stubborn blackberry bramble that had taken over the fence line. The sun was out. The air smelled like damp leaves and the faintest whiff of my neighbor's questionable lawn fertilizer. For a few minutes, life felt almost normal. Then I heard it, the unmistakable crunch of tires on the gravel drive. I turned and saw my mother's silver Buick easing in like a hearse arriving for a very petty funeral. Behind her, Brandon's black Escalade rolled to a stop. The man was apparently determined to look like a wannabe real estate mogul, even on a Thursday. I stood there holding a pair of garden shears, dirt smudged across my cheek, fully prepared for whatever fresh nonsense they were about to deliver. They didn't disappoint. Brandon got out first, wearing aviators and an expression of smug triumph. He strode up the path like he was about to film a car commercial. Mom followed, clutching a manila envelope to her chest like it was a holy relic. "Lucas," she began in that tone she reserved for when she thought I was about to embarrass the family. "We need to discuss some developments." "Afternoon," I said. I made no move to set down the shears. Brandon took over, gesturing with the flourish of a man who practiced this in the mirror. "We've consulted with an attorney," he announced, "and after reviewing Grandpa's will, it's clear the document is outdated. He signed it before several amendments were filed. So legally, the title to this house should have passed jointly." "Jointly with me?" I raised an eyebrow. He clarified as if I were the slow one. "Mom is a witness, so we've submitted a claim to have the title corrected, effective immediately." He handed me a stack of papers, single-sided printouts, with formatting that looked suspiciously like a Word template. Mom chimed in helpfully. "We're giving you a week to move your things. Brandon will be taking over stewardship of the property." I flipped through the pages. No court stamp, no judge's signature, no filing receipt. Just a lot of legal words and a half-blank form at the back. "Stewardship," I repeated. "That's what we're calling this." Brandon nodded solemnly. "We prefer not to involve law enforcement." I almost laughed. The only thing missing was a wax seal and a proclamation in Old English. "Guys," I said, "this isn't how any of this works." Mom's lips thinned. "Don't be difficult. You've never owned property. It's complicated." I glanced down at my dirt-stained jeans, the thorny blackberry branches at my feet, and back at their little delegation. "Well," I said calmly, "lucky for me, I planned for complicated." Brandon tilted his head like a dog hearing a high-pitched noise. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," I said, "you have no legal authority here. If you want me out, you can file your claim with the probate court, but until a judge issues an order, you have no standing. None." "We'll see," he scoffed. "You will," I agreed. "Probably when the clerk files this under fiction." Brandon's ears turned bright pink. He looked at Mom for backup, but she was too busy pretending to read the front porch light fixture to meet my eye. "You have until Friday," he said stiffly. "Sure," I said. "And after that, you're welcome to come back with your sheriff's escort. Just bring real paperwork next time." Brandon's jaw clenched like he was grinding gravel. They stood there another moment, no doubt, hoping I'd crack. I didn't. Eventually, Mom made a brittle little sigh and turned back toward her car. As they pulled away, I waved with the garden shears. It wasn't my most mature moment, but it felt spectacular. Inside, I set their stack of bogus paperwork on the kitchen counter and called Miss Vega. "You were right," I said when she picked up. "They came with legal documents." I could hear her smile over the phone. "I told you," she said. "The moment you stopped being convenient, they'd start acting like you were the villain." I looked around the old house, sunlight streaming through the stained glass window, the cabinets Grandpa built himself, the floorboards he refused to replace because they had character. I'd been underestimated my whole life, but I wasn't about to start rolling over now. If there was one thing I'd learned about my family, it was this. When polite manipulation failed, they'd escalate to outright theatrics. So, I wasn't particularly surprised when, 3 days later, they came back, this time with backup. It was a chilly Monday morning. I'd just made coffee and was standing in the living room flipping through one of Grandpa's old field journals, which he'd filled with notes like, "Never trust a man who says he's too busy to call his mother." Irony, I thought. That's when I saw them. Brandon's Escalade parked in the driveway, Mom's Buick, and a third vehicle I didn't recognize, a white cargo van idling by the curb. I set the mug down and watched through the stained glass window as Brandon emerged, wearing a smug grin that could have gotten him punched in any reputable neighborhood. Mom trailed behind, carrying a clipboard, and behind them, 2 men stepped out of the van. One was tall and barrel-chested, the other shorter and clearly annoyed to be there at 9 a.m. Brandon waved at the house like he was greeting paparazzi. "Lucas," he called. "Open up, please." I didn't. Instead, I cracked the front door just enough to hear him. "These are inspectors," he announced. "We're here to do an occupancy assessment before transfer of ownership." The shorter man squinted up at me. "You the current resident?" I sighed. "What company are you with?" He flipped open a cheap folder. Brandon Real Estate Solutions." I blinked. "That's not a company." "It is." Brandon cut in hastily. "It's my LLC. Perfectly legal." "Cool," said. "So, you started an LLC this weekend. Congratulations. You don't have any authority to inspect this house." Mom stepped closer, voice syrupy and poisonous. "Lucas, don't be childish. This will all go smoother if you cooperate. We can settle this without the courts." The shorter inspector shifted uncomfortably. "We were told there was a signed court order." "Yeah," I said. "You were lied to." Barrel Chest finally spoke up, sounding tired. "Look, we don't want any trouble. Can we see the paperwork?" I smiled sweetly. "Sure, hold on." I shut the door, locked it, walked to the kitchen. From the drawer where I kept Grandpa's old receipts and my own carefully labeled folders, I pulled out a certified copy of the trust deed and the letter from Miss Vega outlining the irrevocable transfer of title. I returned to the doorway and stepped out onto the porch, letting the cold air hit me like a reset button. "This," I said, holding up the documents, "is a certified record of the trust, filed and notarized. This house is owned by Birch and Brick Holdings, LLC. That's my entity, not his." Brandon's smile wobbled. "Lucas, come on," I kept going. "If you or anyone here tries to enter this property without a warrant or a legitimate court order, I will have you trespassed. And just so we're clear, attempting to record a fraudulent title change is a felony. So, if you'd like to test that theory, please be my guest." Barrel Chest glanced at the shorter man, then back at me. "We're leaving," he muttered. He walked off without another word. Mom sputtered. "This is absurd. We are family." "Yeah," I said. "And you should have remembered that before you tried to steal the house Grandpa left me." Brandon tried one last time. "Lucas, you're making a huge mistake." I looked him dead in the eye. "No," I said. "I'm correcting decades of them." Then I turned, went back inside, and locked the door behind me. Through the front window, I watched them argue in the driveway for a few minutes before finally getting back in their cars. I waited until they were gone, then exhaled. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the weakest link in my family. I felt like the only one who remembered what integrity was. I should have known they wouldn't stop after one failed porch ambush. 3 days later, I got a manila envelope delivered by certified mail. No return address, but I didn't need a psychic to guess where it came from. I set it on the kitchen table and stared at it for a full 10 minutes before finally slicing it open with Grandpa's old pocket knife, the one he used to carry clipped to his belt. Inside was a formal letter on letterhead, so cheap it looked like it had been printed at a strip mall UPS store. Demand for settlement. Dear Mr. Lucas Hale, our client, Ms. Patricia Hale, hereby demands payment of $150,000 to compensate for emotional distress caused by your unilateral occupation of the family residence. Immediate transfer of joint ownership of 211 Waverly Street to Ms. Hale, and a monthly stipend to be negotiated in good faith for the maintenance of the property and her future care. Failure to respond within 10 business days will result in further legal action. I read it 3 times, then laughed so hard I startled myself. A settlement. They were acting like I'd stolen their vacation timeshare, not the house I'd spent the last year maintaining while they were too busy to visit Grandpa in hospice. I set the letter down, made myself a sandwich, and called Miss Vega. When she picked up, I read her the demands verbatim. She made a sound that can only be described as a lawyerly snort. "Do you want me to respond?" she asked. "Or would you rather let them flail for a bit longer?" "Let them flail," I said, feeling something almost like relief. And flail they did. The next day, my cousin Andrea called out of the blue. We hadn't spoken since I was 17, and she told me I'd never get anywhere being such a doormat. "Hey, Lucas," she drawled, her tone syrupy enough to rot teeth. "So, Mom told me there's been some drama. Just wanted you to know we're all really worried about you." "Worried about me?" I echoed. "Yeah, it's just people are saying you manipulated Grandpa, that he wasn't a sound mind when he did all this." Ah, there it was. The smear campaign. "Funny," I said, because he seemed very lucid when he asked me to take over his accounts and showed me exactly where the documents were. There was a pause. She cleared her throat. "Well, just know everyone's talking about it. Maybe you should consider, making peace." Translation: give them what they want before they decide to publicly crucify you. After I hung up, I sat in the kitchen, staring at the envelope again. For a second, just a second, I felt that old familiar guilt, the kind I'd been raised on. But this time it didn't stick, because guilt only works if you secretly believe you did something wrong. I hadn't. That evening my phone buzzed again. A text from my cousin Megan, who I actually liked. "Hey, just so you know, your mom's been calling everyone saying you threatened to evict her. She's telling people you forged the will. I'm sorry. She asked me to post about it, but I wouldn't. Check your email." I sent screenshots. I opened my inbox. Sure enough, there were photos of messages Mom had sent to half the family. "Lucas is unstable. He pressured Walt into cutting us out. He threatened to throw me out on the street." None of it true. Not one word. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair. It wasn't about the house anymore. It was about control. About rewriting the story so they could keep believing I was the problem. But they could smear me all they wanted. I knew who I was, and I was done letting them write my ending. I've always been the quiet one, the good sport, the one who let things slide. But as I sat there at the kitchen table, my phone buzzing with half-baked threats and cheap attempts at rewriting history, something in me finally snapped. I opened my laptop and pulled up the shared folder Miss Vega had set up. Inside was everything I needed. The certified trust documents proving the property was mine, the notarized will, and Grandpa's own steady handwriting. The receipt showing the title had been transferred months before he passed. Screenshots of Brandon's triumphant Facebook posts. "Big plans coming soon. Watch this space. Manifesting ownership energy." I still didn't know what that meant. I added Megan's screenshots of my mother's text messages, highlighting every lie she told about me line by line until I had enough to bury their entire narrative in black and white evidence. When the folder was complete, I drafted a letter. Not an angry one, not a rant, just a calm, precise explanation of the facts. "Dear family, I'm writing to clear up any confusion regarding Grandpa Walt's estate. Contrary to rumors, Grandpa signed his will voluntarily with full capacity and had it witnessed by his attorney and a notary public. All relevant documents are attached, including the trust transfer and the property deed. Any further claims that I forged these documents are not only false but defamatory. I will not be engaging in additional speculation or gossip. If you wish to dispute the will, you may do so through the appropriate legal channels. Until then, please consider this my final statement on the matter. Lucas. I attached the entire folder, CC'd every relative I had an email for, and hit send. Then I closed my laptop, took a deep breath, and went for a walk. It was late afternoon, the October light slanting through the trees Grandpa had planted with his own hands. 2 maples and a skinny dogwood, he used to joke, was the runt of the litter. I walked along the cracked flagstone path, past the rusted garden bench, where I used to sit with Grandpa on summer evenings. I could almost hear him in the wind saying the same thing he always did whenever the family drama got too loud. You don't have to let them take pieces of you just because you share a name. I stood there a long time, letting that truth sink in. For once, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like the boy they'd underestimated or the man they'd hoped to corner. I felt solid. When I got back, the house was bathed in warm lamplight. The stained glass window glowed amber and blue, casting soft patterns on the floorboards. The old place felt like it was breathing with me. Quiet, unbothered, finally mine. I made tea and sat by the window while my inbox flooded. Some replies were predictably awful. My Aunt Teresa had written a novel accusing me of tearing the family apart for selfish gain. This from a woman who once stole a fur coat from her own sister. But others were different. Lucas, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize how much you were dealing with. Thank you for clarifying. I wish people would just be honest. I respect how you handled this. Please let me know if you need anything. Reading those messages felt strange, like finally being seen after years of being wallpaper. It wasn't a universal redemption, but it was enough. And when Mom tried calling that night, 3 times I didn't answer. Instead, I forwarded the calls to Miss Vega's office. The next morning, Miss Vega emailed me a short note. You did exactly the right thing. You've shown them you're not afraid, and you have nothing to hide. If they continue, we'll be ready. Brandon, of course, couldn't help himself. He posted a thinly veiled rant on Facebook. It's always the quiet ones you have to watch out for. Family is supposed to share, not hoard, but truth always wins. I screenshotted it, saved it in the evidence folder, and didn't respond because the truth had already won and no amount of hashtags was going to change that. If there was one thing Brandon prided himself on, it was his so-called career. He'd spent the last few years telling anyone who'd listen that he was an acquisitions consultant, which was fancy talk for a licensed real estate agent who hadn't closed a sale in months. I knew he was reckless, but even I underestimated how far he'd take it. It was a Tuesday morning when I got an email from Miss Vega titled simply, Urgent, Unauthorized Filing. I clicked it and felt my pulse thump in my throat. Attached was a scanned document Brandon had tried to file with the county recorder's office, a claim of corrected title transferring ownership from Birch and Brick Holdings to himself. He'd actually forged a line at the bottom, signing Grandpa's name as Walter Hale. Never mind Grandpa, never used the middle initial. He hadn't even spelled irrevocable correctly in the description. Miss Vega's note was short. This is attempted fraud. I've notified the county clerk and will file a formal complaint. Let me know if you'd like to escalate further. I set my laptop aside and rubbed my forehead, feeling that blend of fury and disbelief only family can inspire. 10 minutes later, I called Miss Vega back. I want to do this by the book, I said. I don't want revenge. I just want it documented, so no one can say I overreacted. Understood, she said. I'll draft the complaint to the real estate licensing board. That evening I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the times I'd sat through Brandon's condescending lectures over Thanksgiving, him bragging about his contacts and brand building, smirking whenever someone asked me how my nonprofit job was going. All that arrogance, and for what? I pulled up the complaint form Miss Vega had sent me. It was 8 pages long, requiring meticulous detail. I filled it out line by line. Dates of the attempted filing, copies of the forged documents, screenshots of Brandon's messages threatening to take the house, the notarized trust, and while proving he had no claim. I attached everything, including a statement explaining that I had no interest in pressing criminal charges yet, but I would not tolerate further harassment. The next morning, I emailed it to the state real estate board. Within 48 hours, they replied, "Thank you for bringing this to our attention. We take allegations of title fraud and unethical conduct very seriously. An investigator will follow up shortly." I didn't tell anyone. Not Miss Vega, not Megan, not even my best friend, Drew. I wanted to keep it quiet. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived addressed to Brandon. I recognized the return address immediately. State Board of Realtors, Disciplinary Division. I hadn't opened it, of course, but I did see the look on his face when he showed up unannounced to talk. I'd been out front raking leaves into neat piles. He pulled up, got out, and walked toward me, looking less like the smug salesman he always pretended to be and more like a kid caught stealing candy. "Lucas," he began, voice scratchy. "I just want to stop," I said. "I'm not interested." He swallowed. "They suspended my license. Pending investigation. You know what this means for me." I set the rake aside and crossed my arms. "Yeah, consequences." His eyes darted around like he was hoping someone would jump in and take his side. But we were alone. "You could call them," he said. "You could tell them it was all a misunderstanding." "Was it?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stood there, shoulders sagging. For a moment, I almost pitied him. Then I remembered the forged signature, the threats, the months of lies. "I'm not going to lie for you," I said quietly. "You did this. You'll have to live with it." He stared at me for a long moment. No rage this time, just a flicker of something that looked almost like shame. Then he turned, walked back to his car, and drove away. I watched until his taillights disappeared. Later that night, Miss Vega called to confirm the State Board had opened a formal inquiry. I thanked her, hung up, and sat in the dark kitchen, hands wrapped around a mug of cold tea. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt done. Done being the designated scapegoat. Done pretending this was normal. Done letting them define me. It took 2 more months for everything to stop spinning. By early December, the calls had mostly dried up. The letters trickled to a halt. Even Brandon's pitiful attempts at online sympathy fizzled out when it became obvious no one was buying his story. Then, one frosty Tuesday morning, I got a certified letter from my mother's lawyer. The envelope was thinner this time, just a single page on that same flimsy letterhead. Withdrawal of claims. Dear Mr. Hale, this letter serves to confirm that Ms. Patricia Hale is formally withdrawing all claims against the estate of Walter R. Hale. No further legal action will be pursued. Ms. Hale respectfully requests no further contact. I read it twice, then folded it neatly and set it aside. I expected to feel victorious, some big swell of vindication. Instead, I felt nothing. Nothing except relief. It was over. I stepped out onto the porch into the cold morning air. The old maple Grandpa planted was bare now, skeletal branches silhouetted against the pale sky. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to look over my shoulder to see who was coming to take something from me. The next few days passed in a blur of quiet routines. I cleaned out the attic, finally going through the old boxes I'd been avoiding since the day I moved in. Grandpa's war medals, stacks of yellowing Polaroids, receipts from the hardware store dated decades before I was born, and in one battered shoebox, a bundle of letters bound with twine. Most were simple little notes he'd written to himself. Grocery lists, reminders, the occasional complaint about damn politicians. But at the very bottom was a single envelope addressed to me. "Lucas, open when you're ready." I sat down on the attic floor and opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a single page in Grandpa's neat, blocky handwriting. "Kid, if you're reading this, it means they made this harder than it needed to be. I'm sorry for that, but I'm not sorry for trusting you to do right by this place. You were always the one who showed up, even when it cost you something. Remember, roots matter, but you don't owe anyone your peace just because they share your blood. Be proud of yourself. Love you." I pressed the letter to my chest and just let the tears come. All the years of being the afterthought, the fallback, the safe target for other people's disappointments, it felt like they were finally dissolving. That night, I invited Megan and Drew over for dinner. No big event, just a pot of Grandpa's chili recipe and a bottle of cheap wine. We sat around the kitchen table, telling stories, laughing until my ribs hurt. I realized somewhere in the middle of Megan teasing me about my grumpy old man tendencies that this simple, warm moment was what family could look like. A family that showed up. A family that didn't need you to shrink so they could feel bigger. A few days later, Brandon tried calling. The voicemail was awkward. Some half apology, half request that I call him back so he could explain. I didn't. Instead, I blocked his number and deleted the message without listening to the end, because I didn't need an explanation. I knew exactly who they were. And for the first time in my life, I also knew exactly who I was without them. The night before Christmas, I walked through every room of the house, turning on the old lamps Grandpa had collected over the years. The place glowed like it was alive. I stood in the living room, looking around at the space they all said I couldn't handle alone, and felt something settle in my chest. It wasn't triumph. It was freedom. Freedom from their expectations. Freedom from their manipulations. Freedom to build something of my own on my own terms. Later, I sat in Grandpa's old recliner, the one everyone used to make fun of because it squeaked when you leaned back. I didn't mind the noise. It felt honest. When midnight came, I raised a glass of cheap champagne to the quiet house and whispered, "I did it." No audience, no applause, just the knowledge that I'd survived it all. And finally, I didn't owe them anything anymore. And in that silence, in that old creaky house, I felt more at peace than I ever had in my life. So what about you? Have you ever had to draw a hard line with family to protect your peace or what was rightfully yours? Or maybe you've been on the receiving end of this kind of entitlement. I'd love to hear your thoughts and stories in the comments below.